There are moments in human history when the veil seems to thin, when myth and fact blur into each other like two mirrors facing one another, echoing an image into eternity. We find ourselves now perched at such a precipice, staring into a horizon that is both ancient and alarmingly immediate. The prophecy of the last pope is not merely a relic of apocalyptic lore or ecclesiastical speculation. It is a whisper carried through centuries, a shiver in the great body of time. And as that whisper grows louder, we are compelled to ask, are we hearing the final echo of an age, or merely the rumblings of transformation? To speak of prophecy is to enter a room lit only by candles, flickering light, shadows on the wall, symbols in motion. The words themselves often arrive cloaked, like travelers from distant dimensions, carrying messages that shimmer with both warning and invitation. The prophecy of the final pontiff, foretold most famously by the medieval Irish bishop, St. Malachy, does not stand alone as an isolated prediction. It is part of a wider, richer mosaic, a network of ancient insights, esoteric signals, and spiritual archetypes that stretch across cultures, reaching from the cryptic halls of the Vatican to the pyramidal symbols etched in forgotten stone. At the heart of this prophetic vision lies the name Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, said to be the final pope before the fall of Rome, or perhaps the crumbling of something even greater. Is this end truly geographical, political, or spiritual? The lines are blurred, intentionally so, for prophecy is rarely a roadmap. It is a cipher, an invitation into the deeper architecture of human destiny. In this unfolding, we are not just witnesses, we are keys. And so we must ask, what does it mean to approach the end? Is it the collapse of a church or the unraveling of a collective identity? Is it an ending or an unveiling? In the ancient languages, the word apocalypse did not mean destruction, but rather revelation. Perhaps then, we are not stumbling toward catastrophe, but being ushered into an age where the old illusions must die so that truth may be born. But truth, unlike doctrine, is not tidy. It is a wildfire, devouring the dried branches of obsolete beliefs. The last pope, in this light, may be more than a man. He may be an archetype, a symbol of the final breath of a world order gasping under the weight of its own contradictions. The Church, once a lighthouse in a sea of moral chaos, now stands at a crossroads. Scandals have scarred its marble halls. Political alignments have muddied its once clear waters. And yet, amid this chaos, something ancient stirs beneath the surface, like a leviathan awakening in the deep. The prophetic script does not declare the doom of faith, but perhaps the collapse of its containment. As if the divine, long shackled within rituals and robes, now demands to be seen with naked eyes and heard with uncloaked ears. This prophecy lives in the tension between crumbling and becoming. It breathes within that uncomfortable space where endings masquerade as deaths, but are, in truth, initiations. Like the final ember in a long burning fire, the last pope could symbolize the transition from institutional religion to embodied spirituality. From gatekeeping hierarchies to personal gnosis, from idols on pedestals to inner altars ablaze with awakened presence. And in that space, between the ruins of certainty and the seed of revelation, we are called to listen not with our ears, but with our being. For this isn't merely a tale of the Vatican's last bishop, it's a mirror held up to each of us. The prophecy may speak of a single figure in Rome, but its echo resounds within every soul who has ever clung to the fading structures of the old world, secretly yearning for something more real, more raw, more holy. If we dare to look closer, beyond the scrolls and cryptic verses, beyond timelines and conspiracy theories, we find that this story is not about watching the end arrive from a safe distance. It is about recognizing that we are the age turning its own page. The church, the papacy, the prophecy. They are not distant constructs. They are symbols projected from our own collective psyche, carved into history like constellations, guiding us home. And perhaps that home is not in the sanctuaries of stone, but in the temples of the heart. So as we begin this journey into the mystery of the last pope, let us do so not as frightened children looking for signs of doom, but as ancient beings remembering a truth older than Scripture and deeper than fear. Let us step through this doorway, aware that prophecy does not predict, it reveals. And what it reveals in the end is not just the fall of a figure, but the rise of a new vision. To understand the gravity of the prophecy surrounding the last pope, we must step beyond the surface and enter a realm where language becomes symbolic architecture, where each name, each sign, each sacred tradition folds into a deeper geometry of meaning. What lies beneath the prophetic veil is not merely a prediction about a single institution or individual, but a transmission encoded in spiritual metaphor and psychological resonance. This is not history, it is a map of transformation disguised as doctrine. The essence of this prophecy, as drawn from the enigmatic list attributed to Saint Malachi, is deceptively simple. A sequence of short Latin phrases, each allegedly describing a pope from the 12th century onward. The final entry, reserved for the last pope, departs from the brevity of its predecessors and blooms into an ominous paragraph. It speaks of Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations, concluding with a stark image of the city of 7 hills, Rome, being destroyed and a terrifying judge coming to judge the people. But to read these lines literally is to miss their music. We must instead listen with the inner ear, the ear that hears in archetypes, not events. The Peter mentioned here need not be a man named Peter, nor necessarily Roman by birth. He is the echo of the first Peter, the rock upon which the church was built. A full circle return to the origin, like the Ouroboros devouring its tail. It's not simply the fall of an era, it's the reintegration of that which was fragmented at the beginning. The prophecy's power lies in this cyclical paradox. Like the ancient mysteries of death and rebirth, it invites us to witness not a linear downfall but a spiral, a sacred collapse meant to make way for resurrection. The tribulations it speaks of are not punishments but purifications. In the language of alchemy, this is the nigredo phase, the blackening, where all form is broken down so that the essence may be revealed. The papacy in this vision becomes a crucible, one that has held the weight of centuries, and now must crack so that what is uncorrupted might rise. To grasp the full scope, we must see this not as a Christian drama alone, but as a universal pattern. The idea of a final spiritual authority, a culminating figure, appears across traditions. In Hindu cosmology, there is Kalki, the final avatar of Vishnu, who arrives at the end of the Kali Yuga to destroy illusion and restore Dharma. In Islam, the figure of the Mahdi serves as the awaited restorer of justice. The Hopi speak of a purifier who will cleanse the earth of corruption. Always, there is this archetype, the final guardian, the herald of an end that is not annihilation, but realignment. The last pope, then, is not merely the last bishop in the chain of succession. He is the symbolic manifestation of this archetype in the Christian tradition. Whether embodied in one man or dispersed across a decaying institution, this prophecy is about the confrontation with the shadow that precedes any awakening. It speaks of collapse not because it wishes to incite fear, but because collapse is the only language some structures understand before yielding to truth. And yet there is another current running beneath the prophetic text, one that speaks to the fragmentation of spiritual authority. For centuries, the Church stood as the intermediary between man and the divine. The papacy was the crown of that authority, a living bridge between heaven and earth. But now, in the age of awakening, that bridge is being internalized. The authority is returning to its source, the individual soul. What we are witnessing may be the grand unraveling of external mediation. The last pope may not herald the end of belief, but the end of vicarious spirituality. The priesthood of the self is dawning. As institutions crumble, the sacred must find new homes, not in cathedrals, but in consciousness. Even within the Church, one can feel this undercurrent. The current pontiff speaks often of mercy, of poverty, of care for the earth, echoing themes not of rigid dogma, but of a Christ consciousness that transcends titles. Could it be that the last pope is not one who clings to the old, but one who dissolves the boundary between the throne and the heart? This is where the prophecy becomes urgent, not as a forecast, but as a reflection. Are we nearing the end? If by end we mean the cessation of inherited belief systems and blind obedience to outer authority, then yes, we may be walking directly into it. But that ending is also a beginning. It is the seed of a new spiritual architecture, one that does not require marble pillars or mitres to recognize the divine. The sheep are being nourished, not through control, but through awakening. And what of Rome, the city on 7 hills? Is it destined to burn? Perhaps, but in the language of the mystics, Rome is more than a place. It is the ego structure of the world, the empire of appearances, the institution of illusion. Its burning is not a tragedy, it is an unveiling. As the fire of tribulation spreads, it consumes the false and the hollow, leaving only what is real, and what is real cannot be destroyed. Thus, the prophecy is not a doomsday script, but a sacred mirror. It reflects the end of the age of outer authority and the rise of the inner light. It invites each of us to stop waiting for signs in the sky and begin kindling the fire within. For perhaps the last pope is not coming. Perhaps he is already here, not in Rome, but in you. Stories are the vessels through which truth escapes its prison. When facts fail to carry the weight of the ineffable, symbols rise like smoke from an ancient censer, curling into the sky to form meaning beyond logic. To touch the prophecy of the last pope is to walk into such a story, not a fable, not a parable, but a living narrative that breathes through metaphor, drenched in timeless archetype. Imagine this. High atop a forgotten mountain wrapped in mist, there sits a lone figure in white, not robed in opulence, but cloaked in silence. Around him, the wind carries the cries of ages, fragments of scripture and flame-touched memory. He is the last of his line, not because others have failed, but because the story has circled to its close. This figure is not named. He is every seeker who has inherited a crown they can no longer wear. He looks not to the heavens for guidance, but into the hollowed stone of his own heart. And in that silence, the true gospel is revealed. Not written, not spoken, but known. The last pope, then, is not only a man, but a mythic role, a final guardian at the threshold of dissolution. He carries the bones of Peter and the keys to a kingdom that no longer exists in stone. In one hand, he holds a staff, in the other, an hourglass nearly spent. He is both the shepherd and the lamb, the judge and the penitent. His throne is cracked. His power is not political, but existential. He exists to preside over the funeral of the old world and the birth of the nameless new. In another telling, perhaps whispered through the dreams of mystics and visionaries, Rome is not a city, but a consciousness, an empire built not of marble, but of mind. It is the architecture of control, of hierarchy disguised as holiness. It is the tower we built to reach heaven, only to find ourselves trapped within its spiral. And now, in the final days of this dream, the fire comes. Not from outside, but from within, the divine blaze that demands truth over tradition, awakening over obedience. This fire is not merciless, it is sacred. It burns like the seraphim in Isaiah's vision, cleansing the lips of those who would speak a new word. This is not punishment, but purification. And the Pope, whether last, lost, or transfigured, is the first to walk through it. He walks not as a ruler, but as a pilgrim returning to source. There is another layer, deeper still, one that plays out in the unconscious of all who witness this unraveling. Consider the image of the collapsing basilica, its once immovable columns fractured by time and truth. Beneath it lies a seed, a single, glowing ember of divine origin. For centuries it was buried beneath the rites and rituals, buried under robes and relics. But as the cathedral falls, the seed is exposed. It pulses with a quiet fire, a reminder that nothing sacred is ever truly lost. It is only hidden beneath the weight of forgetting. In this way, the last pope becomes the final veil. When he falls or steps aside, the veil is torn, and the Holy of Holies is no longer a secret chamber, but the heart of all being. The veil within us, between ego and soul, also tears. The prophecy is not about watching someone else meet their fate. It is an invitation for each of us to step into our own role in the story. We are not spectators, we are the unfolding. And yet, another story flickers in the candlelight of contemplation, one rooted not in collapse, but in compassion. Perhaps the last pope is not a figure of doom, but of deep reconciliation. He is the one who returns the church not to power, but to presence. He lays down the crown, walks barefoot into the crowd, and becomes again a man among men, holding the broken in his arms and whispering, "The kingdom is within you." In this narrative, the end is not fire, but surrender, not judgment, but release. The prophecy thus becomes a mirror reflecting whatever we carry into it. If we bring fear, we will see apocalypse. If we bring reverence, we will see revelation. If we bring silence, we may hear the voice beneath all voices, the one that says the last pope is not here to lead, but to let go. Across all these symbols, city, fire, shepherd, veil, we are offered a single question. What are we still clinging to that must be allowed to end? The myth of the last pope presses upon us not to decode it, but to enter it. Like all true myths, it is not meant to be solved, but lived. And if we do live it, something extraordinary becomes clear. The story does not end with the last pope. It ends with the one who awakens in the ruins, eyes wide with wonder, heart blazing like that hidden ember. The prophecy leads not to despair, but to the door of the real. And the key has always been inside. It is one thing to speak of symbols and mystic fire, of veiled truths and ancient echoes. It is another entirely to ask, what now? What does a prophecy such as this mean in the context of daily life, in the early morning stillness before work, in the quiet ache of loss, in the moments we scroll through endless noise seeking a flicker of truth? The prophecy of the last pope is not just an esoteric footnote or a cryptic curiosity locked away in marble archives. It is a lens, an interpretive key for understanding the age we live in, where institutions are crumbling, where trust in spiritual authority is fraying, and where the soul cries out not for dogma, but for direct contact with the divine. The imagery may be ecclesiastical, but the implications are deeply human. Across the world, we are watching the unraveling of long-standing systems, political, religious, cultural. The voice of the old guard is growing quieter, not from suppression, but from irrelevance. People hunger not for leaders, but for liberation. The Pope, in this prophecy, becomes a metaphor for any external authority we have surrendered our sovereignty to. His prophesied fall is not merely the fall of a religious figure, but the collapse of dependence on outer validation. We are being forced, individually and collectively, to reclaim our inner throne. This reclamation is not loud. It does not arrive with trumpet blasts or breaking news headlines. It begins in subtler ways, in the quiet realization that prayer need not be scripted, that divinity speaks in the language of dreams, that a walk through nature can be more sacred than 1,000 sermons. The prophecy then becomes a call to live authentically, spiritually, but without intermediaries. It invites us to see ourselves as both pilgrim and priest, seeker and sanctuary. In practical terms, This shift manifests in myriad ways. People are leaving traditional churches not to abandon faith, but to find it in its raw, unmediated form. Meditation replaces ritual, service replaces doctrine, intuition replaces guilt. We begin to see the divine not in stained glass, but in the face of the stranger. And though this transition is often accompanied by grief for the comfort of certainty, it also brings an indescribable freedom, like stepping into light after centuries in shadow. For those still tethered to tradition, the prophecy need not be an assault. It can be a gentle urging, a soft voice reminding us that the heart of every sacred institution was always the inner flame, not the structure. The last pope need not be seen as a traitor to the old, but as a midwife of the new. Perhaps he is the one who blesses us not with absolution, but with permission to walk our own path, to speak with our own voice, to meet the divine face to face. We must also recognize the prophetic moment in the wider crises of our world: the ecological collapse, the spiritual emptiness, the political polarization. These too are symptoms of a deeper unraveling. The institutions we have built, much like the Vatican in its golden age, are top-heavy, brittle, unsustainable. They are relics of an era that believed salvation came from above, be it God, government, or guru. The prophecy in this sense demands integration with how we vote, how we spend, how we create, how we live in communion with the earth. It whispers, "Stop waiting for rescue. You are the one you've been waiting for." Even more personally, the prophecy speaks to the smaller revolutions in our lives. It speaks to the moment we stop looking for the perfect mentor, the perfect system, the perfect savior, and instead begin trusting the quiet intelligence already humming inside us. It speaks to the moment we recognize the voice of God not in thunder, but in stillness. It speaks to the courage it takes to walk away from hollow certainty and step into the unknown, trusting that it will shape us into something truer. This transformation is not about abandoning tradition, but transcending it, not discarding wisdom, but daring to wear it in new forms. A person who has integrated the meaning of this prophecy may still attend church, but they do so not to be told what God is, but to be reminded of what they already know. They may still pray, but no longer beg. They commune, they create, they embody. In this world shaped by the prophecy's unfolding, truth is no longer centralized. It is decentralized, fractal, intimate. Each person becomes a living tabernacle. Each moment becomes a holy day. Each act of love becomes a sacrament. And yes, there is resistance. The old world does not yield without mourning. There are those who will cling to their crowns and titles, to their power and robes. They will declare the prophecy false or twist it into fear. But even this is part of the script. The tower must tremble before it falls. The light must blind before it guides. The prophecy of the last pope is not a curtain call. It is an awakening bell. It rings not to declare an ending, but to signal the threshold of a new era. An era in which the sacred is not confined to cathedrals, but explodes outward into every street, every soul, every blade of grass kissed by sunlight. And so we stand now, not beneath collapsing spires, but before a wide, trembling doorway. The question is not whether we believe the prophecy, but whether we will live its invitation. Whether we will stand up from the pew, walk barefoot into our lives, and become the priests of our own becoming. There comes a point in every story, especially the sacred ones, when the tale must end, not with the closing of a book, but with the turning of a soul. The prophecy of the last pope is not meant to rest in parchment and candlelight. It is a living current, a spiritual river seeking tributaries in our lives. And as we arrive at the close of this exploration, it is not closure we find, but a doorway, wide and breathless. The question is not whether the prophecy will come true. It already is. The question is what we will do in its light. Let us look once more into the sacred mirror that this prophecy holds up to our time. It reflects a world that is trembling, not because it is ending, but because it is remembering. It is remembering that authority was never meant to rest in a single man, or behind the walls of a city of 7 hills. It was always meant to rise within us, quietly, reverently, like dawn. We are the inheritors of this remembering. We are the cracked vessels in which a new wine is being poured. The last pope is not the death of the sacred, it is the sacred removing its mask. No longer confined to mitres or Latin liturgy, the divine now wants skin. It wants breath. It wants to be lived, not worshipped from a distance. This is the transformation at the heart of the prophecy, the shift from hierarchical religion to decentralized divinity, from the spectacle of holiness to the embodiment of it, from passive belief to direct encounter. And this requires courage, not the kind that charges into battle, but the kind that quietly stands before its own reflection and refuses to flinch. For each of us, this prophecy asks the same question: where have I surrendered my inner voice to an outer throne? The answer may come slowly, it may arrive in the silence between questions. But once it comes, you cannot unknow it. You can only live differently. The fall of Rome is not a city ablaze, it is the mind unbinding itself from illusion. The crumbling of cathedrals is not desecration, it is the soul choosing sky over stone. And the end of the papacy, as foretold by the prophecy, is not an end at all. It is a transmission complete. The torch has been passed, not to another bishop, but to every awakened heart. In this light, we must revisit the notion of judgment mentioned in the prophecy. The terrible judge it foretells is not a robed figure descending from clouds. It is the judgment of clarity, the fierce knowing that cuts through pretense and asks only for what is real. This is not a threat, but a mercy. For once you see clearly, you can no longer live asleep. You must build differently, love more bravely, speak with truth even when your voice trembles. And build we shall. The new spiritual age, this crownless era, is not a utopia but a challenge. Without external commandments, we must learn to hear the law written on our own hearts. Without intermediaries, we must trust the quiet radiance of inner guidance. We will not always get it right, but we will be real. And in that authenticity, we will find holiness again, not as dogma, but as direct, wild contact with the infinite. In the ashes of the old world, the seeds of the luminous new are already stirring. We see it in the grassroots communities reclaiming ritual without hierarchy, in the poets and mystics and musicians channeling the sacred without seeking pulpits, in the solitary souls who sit beneath trees and remember what the temples forgot, that the divine was never lost, only obscured by gold and fear. So if you feel a stirring in your spirit as you consider this prophecy, do not ignore it. Let it draw you inward and onward. Let it remind you that you are not here to follow, but to awaken. You are not here to kneel at altars built by others, but to become a living altar, flawed, luminous, and profoundly free. There may come a day when historians mark the final chapter of the papacy. But for those with eyes to see, that moment is less an obituary and more a birth announcement. The age of spiritual monarchy is ending. The age of sovereign soulhood has begun. And it begins with you. So rise, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Speak, not to convert, but to illuminate. Walk, not toward heaven, but from it, as one who carries the spark of a kingdom that can never fall. The last pope has spoken. The story has closed. Now the silence begins. Now you begin.